Hi, welcome to Resin Chem Tech. Today I want to take a quick look at something that was quite a bit of labor of love for me, and that was building my own coin-operated retro arcade cabinet. We'll take a quick look at the cabinet design, some decisions that I made. Obviously we'll take a look at some of the games that are available, but we'll spend the majority of the time kind of talking about the controls and the control panel. So hang around. There are many like it, but this one is mine. So after doing some research and looking at pre-built options like multi-cades and other options, I knew to get what I really wanted I was going to have to build it myself. I wanted to try to recreate as closely as possible my old teen years of the 80s arcade, and that including making the cabinet coin-op. Nothing beats having to throw a quarter into that machine to try to get the high score. So as I started thinking about the control panel, one of the things that I did was first I built a prototype. I did this with just cheap arcade controls that I got off of Amazon. One thing I quickly discovered after hooking this up just to an HDMI monitor and playing some of the games was that these arcade controls just didn't have the right feel. They didn't feel like the arcade controls. I also knew I was going to want a trackball for games like Centipede, and I was going to need a rotary controller for things like Tempest or driving games. The cabinet itself is basically built with MDF. 3/4 inch for the sides and some of the shelving supports inside, and 1/2 inch MDF for the rest. It took me probably about 3 months part-time to completely build the cabinet, but it was well worth the effort, and a big part of that has to do with this control panel. We're going to talk about the control panel in a little bit. One other thing I wanted out of the cabinet was I wanted to be able to do maintenance and troubleshoot any problems without having to tear the cabinet apart. So as you can see here, the entire control panel is hinged, which gives me access to all of the controls in addition to the Raspberry Pi, which by the way is what runs all the games using RetroPie software. So I wanted to make sure that I could do things like get into this and maintain it. Also here, we pan to the top of the cabinet. You'll see there's also a hinged access panel added to the top that gives me access to the LED lighting behind the marquee and also the ability to replace the marquee graphics. The entire cabinet is on casters, so it does wheel out, and the entire back is a pegboard back for ventilation and also hinges open to allow me any other access to the internals of the cabinet. A few other things on the cabinet is this back what I call administrative control panel. Back here you'll see a power button that will power up and down the Raspberry Pi, a toggle switch for the joysticks which I didn't need, a volume control for the speakers, and a couple of USB ports that connect to the Raspberry Pi. These can be used for either updating or to hook up game controllers for things like Nintendo or Sega. Then of course there's the coin operated door, and I ended up adding a little under cabinet LED effect lighting that actually is synchronized to the sound. But that's enough about the cabinet. Let's take a look at some of the games. And what you're looking at here is basically the menu system of RetroPie, and you can see some of the different emulators that I currently have installed. Again, my primary goal here was the arcade games, but as you can see I currently have just under 3,300 games installed, and 406 of those are arcade games. This is just a quick browse through the menu of the coin-operated arcade games. Odds are if you visited the arcades anytime in the 80s, the game that you played is likely to be here. There are a few, some light gun games. I thought about adding a light gun, but those just weren't the games I normally played. Some of the, like the Star Wars cabinets that you sit down in, aren't represented here, but for the most part, most of the 80s arcade games are here. So now I want to spend some time talking about the control panel. One of the things I learned from my prototype was, first of all, the low-end cheap buttons just didn't have the right feel, and I was really concerned about how long that they were going to last. But in addition to wanting the trackball and the spinner control, one of the biggest issues were the joysticks. If you've played, most joysticks that you'll buy are normally 8-way joysticks. They register in 8 directions. But for games like Pac-Man or Donkey Kong that expect a 4-way joystick, they can be very frustrating to play. So I was trying to find a way that I could have a joystick that can be both 4-way and 8-way via use of a restrictor plate. And thank goodness I found a company called Ultimark, located in London, England, that make professional arcade controls and had exactly that. I'll leave a link in the video description to RetroPie and Ultimark and everything else I talk about here. What's really cool, you'll notice here in a second that I believe the game I'm looking to pick is it actually is Donkey Kong. The joysticks by default are set in 8-way mode, but when you select a game that expects a 4-way joystick, the game will boot up and look right below the joysticks, the little red LED lights. That now means these joysticks, a restrictor plate has moved and made them a 4-way joystick. Also notice that only the buttons necessary for a particular game are lit up. Since there's so many different games, trying to remember all the different button combinations. So here I believe I'm selecting Defender, which I think has actually 5 buttons on the cabinet. So when this boots up, you'll notice that it will light up just the 5 buttons that are used. This is made possible through some outstanding software called RGB Commander. And again, I'll leave a link to that in the description. Not only does it allow you to set all the custom colors and patterns that you want, here I just kind of have it rotating through the patterns, but is able to determine when the game launches the mode of the joystick and the buttons used and set them all appropriately. I had put a toggle switch on that back access panel thinking that this wasn't going to be possible to do through software, but it was possible and it works great, and thanks to the great folks at Ultimark and the author of RGB Commander. Another thing that's possible through use of RGB Commander, so let's say you do go to play something like Atari 2600 games. Those obviously just have a single button and a single joystick, if you remember those back in the day like I do. And the same thing will apply to those emulators, but it's primarily, instead of on a game-by-game basis, emulator-by-emulator basis. So I think that what I selected here was really an Atari 2600 game. So obviously it's one player only and one button only, so that's what lights up. I can't stress enough how much of a difference buying good quality arcade controls have made. And this cabinet is now actually over 3 years old and has been beat to death by friends, neighbors, and teenagers. And the controls have held up wonderfully, and I've not had a single problem with any of them. So if you're looking at doing one of these yourself, I would really suggest that you spend the money to get good quality arcade controls. To be honest, the cost of the controls themselves would nearly cost half the cost of the entire arcade cabinet. But once again, it was money well spent. So that's a very quick overview of my arcade cabinet and my build. If you're interested in more details, I actually have an entire blog dedicated to just the build of this arcade, from the planning stages to the construction, to the wiring, to the controls, and I'll leave a link to that blog if you want to know more details about this particular cabinet build. It was a labor of love. I am not a woodworker. It's by far the biggest, most complex thing I'd ever built woodworking wise, but if you take your time and do a little bit of studying, you can build one of these at your own house as well. So I'm glad I did it. It's held up well over the years, and it gets used even 3 years later, probably gets used at least once every couple of weeks or so. If nothing else, I fire it up to relive my teenage years. So that's going to do it for this video. It was a quick high-level overview, but check out the video description for links for more details, or if you want to know more about this cabinet. And if you like this video, please click the like button. That will let me and YouTube know whether you want to see more videos of this type. And if you do want to see more videos, click the subscribe button and then hit the bell icon if you want to be notified when I release a new video. As always, once again, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.